We're all familiar with the catchphrase, think global, act local. So why is it that the Ontario government would force small distilleries to hand over almost 2/3 of their revenue in tax? That's why we're here at the Toronto Distillery Company to speak with co-founder Charles Benoit, who has been leading the crusade for fair tax reform when it comes to spirits in Ontario. So I'm with Charles Benoit, who is the co-founder of the Toronto Distillery Company and the president of the Ontario Craft Distilleries Association. First of all, Charles, can you give our audience a little thumbnail sketch of what the Toronto Distillery Company is all about?
Sure. We're a small grain-to-glass distillery, so that means we work with raw agricultural inputs and we make a finished product. So just the way you think of a small brewery, they brew and bottle on site. We're the same, small distillery, but with spirits.
Okay, then. So you've set up here in the Junction Triangle area of Toronto. You're distilling various spirits, and then you quickly discovered that the tax threshold in this province for an operation such as yours, it is very tough to make a living.
Yeah, that's right. We went in with eyes wide open that we know the tax burden was very high, but going back to at least August 2013, we've been hearing from the provincial government that they understood that, and the same kind of tax reforms that enabled the craft beer boom would happen on the craft spirit side. We'd seen it already happen in a lot of provinces like BC going back to 2013 as well. So we were just optimistic that the government was going to introduce reforms that other places had and that Ontario's already done for wine and beer on the spirit side.
And if you can give us some background, I mean, the tax threshold, we're talking like 2/3 of your revenue goes to the tax man. First of all, if I can ask you, Charles, with that kind of a tax threshold, how does the province even think a guy like you can make a living in the first place?
I go back and forth. I kind of don't think that I think this tax indicates that they're actually not interested in having small-scale distillers in Ontario. So, certainly the government's lawyer, when we challenged this tax at court, said that it was a government policy to not have more distilleries. So it could be, it does seem to be by design tax to destroy.
Now, you launched, it was basically a challenge that the tax on spirits was unconstitutional because it hadn't been passed by the legislature. Can you tell us what happened in court and what the judge had to say about that?
Sure. So we were very happy with that challenge because with the current system, before this tax came in, we had to sell on the LCBO's behalf. It was this weird control system, and even though it was really it was just about money, collecting a lot of money, that control system sort of muddied the argument because we were saying, oh, we were selling on the LCBO's behalf. Now, I always thought that when the province replaced that with a tax, which is what our court case was about, that we would get a good tax. I was pretty naive, especially after seeing what they did with beer and grocery, but they actually did legislate a 61% tax. So that's what we asked the court to do, is for them to legislate a tax. We were just naive in the sense that we thought that when they legislated a tax, it would probably be something reasonable and allow our sector to grow.
I guess, Charles, in terms of alternatives, I understand the craft distillers here in Ontario would like a system similar to what exists in British Columbia. I believe the craft distilleries there don't pay a provincial markup on the first 50,000 liters of spirits produced. Is that what you want, and how would that help distilleries of your size?
That would be amazing. We told this government if they even gave us just 10% of what BC had, so no tax on the first 5,000 liters, we'd actually be applauding them now and thanking them for giving us a chance. So the fact that they rejected that was really disappointing. When you're a small distillery, if you only sell 5,000 liters in your first year, you depend on that completely. I mean, that's not going to dividends or new Jaguar for the owner. No, that's being 100% reinvested in, well, not even reinvested, just invested in the necessary equipment, feedstock to grow, especially in our business where you're buying grain to lay down whiskey for several years. So it's entirely invested in the economy. The fact that they want to tax our first bottle at 60% is just crazy.
And Charles, what is the ostensible policy reason for the government rejecting something of the BC model? Or as you said, you just wanted 10% of that number. What reason do they give you in rejecting you?
They've said explicitly they don't want it to be more profitable for us to sell out of our own store than the LCBO, which is just economically illiterate. Any manufacturer, when they price a product, a retail product, they're going to price in room for distribution. And if your manufacturer can convince a customer to come to the place where it was made to buy it, then that whole distribution tier of the price, which is typically about a third of the retail price, should be enjoyed by the manufacturer to keep that business going, to keep on the marketing and build the brand. It's like your base, and then when you have your base, then you can start looking at distribution and going to places like the LCBO.
Now, also, Charles, there is a different threshold of taxes or not for small, craft wineries and breweries in Ontario. Why does the landscape change when it comes to liquor?
Well, I think that, again, it comes to this particular government. So I don't want to fault governments 20 years ago because there wasn't any small-scale distilling scene. It used to cost well over $1 million as recently as 10 years ago to start a distillery. Now the costs of entry have come down to about $50,000. You can start a distillery. So that's why we're now seeing all these distilleries attempting to come online and successfully coming online in other jurisdictions. So I don't want to fault previous governments. Now, with regards to this government and their lack of interest in working with the small distillers, I have to point again and make the analogy to how they shut out small and independent grocers as well. So that seems to be the common theme with this government.
Now, in the popular press, Charles, there was a spokeswoman for Charles Sousa, who, the Ontario Finance Minister, that is, who said that under the new law, it will help distillers by increasing their sales commission from 13% to about 20%. She also said the province is proposing to help distillers by giving them a tax exemption on up to 1,250 liters of spirits for promotional purposes. Does that amount to the proverbial hill of beans for you?
Well, it actually makes our situation worse and goes to what I've been saying all along. So 1,250 liters is not a number that came from us. That's an extraordinary amount of spirits to give away. I mean, that was, for our Toronto Distillery Company, that was about a quarter of what we sold through the LCBO last year. So the fact that the province is willing to write off the tax revenue from 1,250 liters, but only for companies that can afford to give it away for free as opposed to sell it, again, speaks volumes as to why Spirits Canada might be pleased with this bill and why craft distillers are so against it. So if they'd said we could sell those 1,250 liters tax exempt, that would be pretty great. Again, that would be enough to be like, okay, well, here's a start. But if we try to sell one bottle, they want at least 61% sales tax plus the other taxes. But if we give it away, that's fine. Well, that's just what a better way to guarantee that we don't succeed than saying, changing the competitive landscape such that you have to give away 1,250 liters to participate.
So this is incredible. Just so I understand this right, they'll take away the tax threshold, provided that you don't actually charge anyone for the booze. You've got to give it away to them. Precisely.
I mean, it's a joke. We all saw that number. That wasn't written with any small distillery in mind. That, again, is a handout to big liquor.
And I guess as a final question, you have publicly stated that unless you get a break on the tax threshold the way it is, you have no choice but to shutter this operation. So I'm just wondering, is that so much political posturing, Charles, or is this a real threat?
No, it's real. So the tax is now passed, and we're unfortunately closing January 31st. We're going to be able to keep our listing in the LCBO alive. There's another organic distillery in Eastern Ontario, Kings Lock, and so there'll be. I was just there this weekend. They're taking over. They'll help us we'll contract distill the gin from their facility to keep the LCBO listing alive, and then hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to return when better policy comes in.
So this is interesting. It is a done deal. Come the 1st of February, there is no such thing as the Toronto Distillery Company here because of, I guess, bureaucracy and a tax threshold that makes it unprofitable for you to operate.
That's right. So we're here in Toronto. We rent this space. We don't own it. That's not a system. We really depend. We're planning. Hopefully, we're going to depend on our retail store. We had built up a lot of good traffic here. We sell most of our revenue is from our own retail store. With this tax, we have to give it all back to Ontario. It's not viable. So we're having to work together. Let's bring in some of the distillers in the cities. Out with distillers out in the country that own the land and they have lower overhead, so they're in a better position to ride out this government until a better tax comes in.
You know, it seems so sad because we have a business climate in this province right now where people are being forced to shut down or relocate just because of the electricity bills. Yeah. And now here's an added element. It's not that you have concern with the power bills, but just because of what the government is asking for you, they've made your operation unfeasible according to the letter of the law.
Yeah, and actually the power bills do hurt us too. We
What am I saying?
yeah, we use very little hydro, very little. It's natural gas, and yeah, we pay $400 or $500 a month in hydro. It's totally crazy for how little we use. So it's really unfortunate.
And the other members of the Ontario Craft Distillery Association, what's their situation? Charles, will some of them in the coming year or the coming months have to shut down as well?
Yeah, it's totally changing the nature of the landscape. So I suppose, again, if you're in the country and you own your land and you don't have employees, you're going to be better. You can try and buckle down and ride it out. So some are better situated like that. Others are going to have to turn into, and this is again goes back to Spirits Canada, going to Spirits Canada's member companies and just buying the spirit and repackaging it. That's one way that you can kind of try to exist by, if you're not doing all of the manufacturing and distilling yourself, you bring your costs way down. So I think that's one of the reasons why Spirits Canada is maybe all right with it. They don't mind small distillers existing so long as the small distillers are just repackaging product they got from the big distillers.
And I guess when you hear people from the provincial government say that this province, Ontario, is open for business, what do you say?
Open for big business, and that's it. This province has no interest in providing a competitive opportunity for someone to try to like break in, start out themselves. It really is that kind of cartel cronyism that is really destructive effects.
At the end of the day, the Toronto Distillery Company should be a success story. After all, they source local ingredients such as juniper berries, beets, grains. They employ people, they invest in infrastructure, and they make a darn good bottle of whiskey. Yet, thanks to an egregious tax threshold, the Toronto Distillery Company and other small distillers in Ontario are literally being taxed to death. So much so that Charles Benoit is going to shutter this store come January 31st. It's enough to drive one to drink. For the Rebel Media, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies.